everybody, and welcome. I am here today with Glenn Blackett, who is a Calgary based lawyer and litigator in the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms Network. His legal practice focuses on constitutional and civil rights, and he is one of our speakers at the Reclaiming Conference coming up here in just a few weeks with We Unify. Thank you so much for joining us today, Glenn.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, to get us started, I would love to give our audience a little bit of background on you and kind of how you got started in the world of law. So, what was it that led you to pursue this career, and why did you choose the University of Calgary for both your undergraduate and your graduate studies?
So I got into law because I had done a undergraduate degree in political science, and I had done an undergrad program with Tom Flanagan, Ted Morton, Reiner Knopf, some fairly traditional classical liberals at the university. And I found the subject matter fascinating, and I wanted to get somehow into a profession that allowed me to stay in that area somewhat. And law is kind of the mechanics that makes all that work. And the other reason I got into law is because I really liked arguing, and lawyers get to argue a lot. So,
Did you
um,
have a specific vision for your career when you were first starting out in school?
honestly, my dream was to become a constitutional lawyer because
Yeah.
I thought that was the most fascinating kind of law. And yeah, now that's pretty much what I do. So
That's awesome. So,
yeah.
looking back, how did your experience at law school shape your views on the legal system and eventually kind of form what is now your practice?
Well, I mean, the legal system is appropriate to the political system, right? And so the legal system that I expected to practice in is one that would support a liberal democracy. And for the most part, that's what our legal system does. And that's my area of practice now is dealing in constitutional freedoms, like free speech. And free speech is really one of the fundamental pillars of a liberal democracy. It's one of the reasons you have a liberal democracy so that you can have the freedom to speak, but it also free speech supports that form of government. So yeah, so I'm right in squarely in the wheelhouse that I wanted to be in.
That's wonderful. And I'm curious as to what point or did you notice wokeness begin to infiltrate the legal profession? Because we actually have a couple of lawyers who are participating in our conference this year that I've had the opportunity to interview. And that seems to be a common theme. A lot of them have noticed this agenda kind of infiltrating what used to be a unbiased career platform. So I'm curious as to if you noticed that, and if so, at one point did it become apparent?
I would say probably as early as my undergrad, working with Ted Morton, especially. He and Reiner Knopf did a lot of analysis of constitutional case law under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And it was then that I sort of came to see the Charter of Rights and Freedoms less as a, statement of freedoms that is neutral or beneficial in a liberal democracy, but rather as sort of a political instrument. It was something that was inserted. I think Ted Morton would say inserted into the Constitution, not so much to support liberal freedoms, but rather to permit policy making to be accomplished instead of by the legislature, which is where it's supposed to happen, but instead in court. And so he did a lot of analyses that I helped with to some extent, looking at case law and you could sort of see in that case law what appeared to be some fairly left-leaning political trends in the case law. And so I'd say that's where I first encountered it.
Mhm. And has it changed since then?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's become a lot more overt. I mean, I don't know what year it was, maybe about 2019. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Justice Wagner, said he was proud that his court was the most progressive in the whole world, which is quite quite the confession. I think that judges pretended to be somewhat apolitical, but it seems to be that the shackles are now off.
Mm. So this like progressiveness working towards being the most progressive, that's such a weird thing to say. But is that impacting like the legal language and the hiring process and how you all go about advocacy? Like specifically when it comes to DEI, have you noticed there to be a negative impact on the legal profession because of that push?
Yeah, hugely so. I mean, it's in a weird way, it hasn't infiltrated in a big way, but just a little bit is kind of like a little bit of poison in the water. It doesn't need to be much to really catastrophically destroy the integrity of the system. So we're seeing it now more and more for sure. And I mean, the most recent example I can think of would be there was a case, I can't remember the name, but it was a Peel Regional Police stop of an individual. The court found that the individual who was black that was stopped because there was racial profiling, which I don't know if that was true or not. It was hard to think that that was a completely solid conclusion based on the facts that were presented. But in that case, the judge also said that, that blacks in Canada are the victims of systemic discrimination. And I don't know if she said it there or not, but there's a judicial attitude that it's the court's job to resolve systemic discrimination in their court rulings, which is just, I think kind of a lawless application of a political objective in their duties.
Mm, interesting. And have you seen lawyers lose their practices because of refusal to go along with this ideology?
No, I don't think so. Not at this point.
Mm,
No,
not at this
but
point.
no, but part of the problem with, um, let's put it this way, the propaganda doesn't work that way necessarily. It
Mm,
doesn't require that a person be fired, although you do need to know that if you lose your, if you say something wrong, wrong enough, you could lose your license to practice. But once there is that kind of pressure, or maybe an example made of a person here or there, then you have a real force that causes people to just self-censor. And
mm,
so even those people that aren't, you know, party members, let's say, uh, all they need to do is keep quiet or to be cooperative, and then the system operates. So it's not, that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that, um, who do you have coming into the profession now? And who you have coming into the profession now are people who have gone through a secondary or a primary education that's got a lot of this kind of indoctrination, university that's got a lot of this indoctrination, a law school program that is steep with it. And you have to, in many law schools, basically agree to what I call oaths of loyalty to these political systems. And then you have to be accepted into a firm and so forth. So there's so many kind of filters along the way that, at this point, the people coming into the profession, for the most part, they've filtered out probably the people that would be most vocal against
mm.
this stuff. And so the people you have coming into the profession are either the true believers or people that, whether they're true believers or not, it doesn't matter, because from the outside they appear to be a true believer, which is, enough for them to be a lawyer that's not going to help out.
So the next question I had for you was, you have described, like, in your Substack, wokeness specifically as a little bit of a authoritarian ideology. So I'm curious as to what characteristics or behaviors specifically informed that conclusion for you.
Well, I mean, if you start right at the basis of the ideology, it's postmodern. So it views truth as not there's no objective truth, meaning there's no such thing as the real world. There's only things that we think are true, and we either think they're true because we are oppressors or we've embraced an oppressive truth, or we're victims and we've likewise embraced this, oppressive truth. So the let's say the validity of a fact is not whether or not it's objectively true, but whether or not it tends to oppress. And so because of that, what that means is that there's no objective truth for us to independently go and seek out, right? There's just oppressive truths and, truths that promote social justice. And so if the world's divided into those categories, then what, the inclination is to make sure that the population believes the socially just truths, not the other truths that are oppressive truths. And so it, freedom is allowing another person to go out and, for example, seek objective truth on their own. But that's not a useful model where, to arrive at any truth except a socially just truth is an act of oppression. Which is kind of a long way of saying that, the whole premise of liberalism, which is that each person can go out and be their own, explorer in life and their own agent and decide what they want to do and what they want to believe. That's, anathema to postmodernism, really, or to wokeism. So, and I mean, it would take a while to sort of, I guess, explain all that, but you could, for example, look at the Law Society's DEI resources, and the Law Society's DEI resources clearly vilify liberalism by name and say that liberalism, is effectively a system of oppression because it makes it look as if we've all arrived at these truths through, our independent agency, but really it's kind of a cover for us continuing to believe things that tend to oppress. So yeah, I mean it's a little complicated to explain fully, but that's kind of the basics.
And if I can ask, just for those who might not be familiar, postmodern, what is that ideology or what does that society look like, postmodern society?
Well, I mean, I, I don't even know if there's such a thing as a postmodern society. Wokeness, as I understand it, is basically the theory of postmodernism, which is there's no such thing as the real world. Our our what we believe to be true is all a social construct, and the social construct is created to support some kind of a hierarchy of oppression. So basically, the reason we think something is true is because it tends to oppress the oppressed group, whoever that is. And in the West, we tend to think certain things are true or good. Like, we think that, liberal democracy is both useful and fulfilling for people that live in a liberal democracy. Woke or postmodernism would say, well, you only think that because the white Anglo-Saxon Christian male makes us think that because if we think that, it tends to oppress every other, identity group or something. So, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did answer my question.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so to kind of circle back a little bit to, your involvement and kind of how you are speaking up against this particular ideology, can you talk a little bit about how you got involved with JCCF and what is the mission behind that organization?
Yeah, so I first came across JCCF a long time ago in practice on some free speech file, but I hadn't really thought much of them until COVID. And during COVID, I was working downtown as a partner in a medium-sized law firm, not in the constitutional space, not really in the space of any kind of freedoms or anything like that, but basically, the world's reaction to COVID-19 really bumped my confidence that our legal system and our political system was heading in a good direction. And I became concerned enough about, really, I think, unreasonable, irrational, sort of almost religious attacks on personal freedoms. I would hear phrases like, this isn't about your freedoms, which is such an such a nonsense statement.
Yes,
Um,
it is.
yeah, anyway, but I'd say Canada's reaction and the world's reaction to COVID made me start to really worry about the state of freedom and democracy in Canada. And I really wanted to start to use my legal skills to fight against these trends that I think were chipping away at our Constitution. And
Mhm.
so, and the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms was very active during COVID, fighting against the irrationality of it all. And so yeah, I went and put in a an application and got a job.
That's wonderful. So now looking forward, what reforms or alternatives do you and the JCCF team kind of see or envision for a less woke legal system? What are steps that need to be taken to kind of preserve that from happening?
Yeah. I mean, long-term solutions and short-term solutions. The long-term solution is, again, we have to start with our public education. I think that there's, so far as I can tell from the outside, there's a lot of indoctrination, leftist indoctrination that happens in the primary education system. up through, high school and through university and into law schools. So, I think that there needs to be a major reforms to our public education system. I mean, if we indoctrinate people to be leftists, they're going to grow up to be leftists and they're going to vote left, which is, I guess if you're a leftist, that's a dream come true. But if you're a person that likes freedom, that's a nightmare. So it starts there. I think the law schools are a serious problem. Again, you have these sort of, not, I mean, it's not technically this, but kind of oaths of political loyalty in order to get into or in order to pass your various courses, especially kind of political courses in university. There's, and then once you get into the legal profession, we now have since about 2020 a regulator in Alberta, and I think that's quite similar across the whole country, that has taken it upon itself to take a firm leftist position on political issues and use its regulatory power to bend the profession to behave more leftist and to, I would say, pervert the legal system from, one of a democratic legal system where lawyers are the neutral kind of operators of the legal system to one where, who cares what the legislature may have had to say about it? The law should be this way. And as lawyers, our job is to make sure that the law, operates that way, whatever the words may be. So, so public education, the law schools, and the profession, the legal regulator especially, and then finally, of course, courts. We appoint people to the courts that, I think in many cases are overtly left and political in their activities, either in lower courts or in private practice. And I think, especially where you have judges that are being appointed by the prime minister, like a liberal prime minister, Trudeau, those are, he seems to be more likely to select that kind of a candidate, let's say. But even the provincial government, I've been complaining to the provincial government about the politicization of the regulator. And in response to that, so far the province seems to continue to select the directors in charge of that regulator for provincial appointments to the bench. So, if these people are going to, as directors of the Law Society, politicize and I think pervert our role as lawyers, well, what do you expect they're going to do when they get to the bench? So, and then finally, I think there needs to be legislation passed that, and I don't see why it should be limited to the Law Society or even to professional regulation. I think it should be basically a government-wide piece of legislation that basically says if you have statutory power, like you're a regulator of doctors or regulator of lawyers, you cannot use that statutory power for any political purpose. Because, you're given power, which means there is a law that already binds what you do. Your job is not to change that law. Your job is to follow that law.
Absolutely. And circling back a little bit to the importance of education, and you touched on how a lot of young people are entering into this profession being indoctrinated. And so I want to kind of tie this full circle a little bit, because what kind of We Unify is seeking to do this year is be an educational resource for people, maybe young lawyers who may not know where to start. They might not know how to find other voices outside of those that are pushing more
Hmm.
leftist ideology. And so I'm curious to hear how you became interested in joining us as a speaker at the Reclaiming Conference. How did you find our organization? What is your hopes for that particular weekend?
I found it, like an ad came across I don't know where, maybe my social media feed, I think, and I thought, wow, that looks great. And so I reached out to our group to make sure that we would have a presence there. And then I got contacted by one of the organizers to see if I would speak there. And so it worked out perfectly. What would I hope? I mean, I would hope that, I mean, as far as little Glenn here is concerned, my hope is that even though, I think that lawyers especially and other people understand that, okay, politicizing, medicine or politicizing the law, that's kind of a problem. I feel like people don't quite understand how big of a problem that is in the law society. Like if lawyers take it upon themselves that the law needs to be changed, lawyers can change the law directly, which is just a fantastic, catastrophic problem for the rule of law. And so I think that, the this tree I've been barking up for a few years here, is something that I really hope to be able to make more people very worried about, and to put on their radar. I hope I'm sure that for every person that's attending, there's a similar sort of a message that they want me to know about. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then of course, like you say, making connections is just really important. And I mean, I think just going to a conference, like during COVID, I felt like just a voice in the wilderness. I felt quite alone, and I'm not saying this like a psychology problem, like, oh, poor me, but what I mean is it can kind of make you a little loopy, like it makes you a little crazy making. So it's really nice to be able to get into a room of people who also believe still in reason and objectivity, and can have a civil dialogue about difficult issues, and things like that. And so I think for the people out there that are freedom fighters, it's a nice little reset so that they can know that they're not crazy.
Absolutely. And if you could sit down with a lawyer or student of law, what would you say to them to emphasize the importance of attending a conference like this one?
Well, I would say, there's a couple of really important things in order to fight the fight, and one of them is education. And the other one is contacts. So this is a conference that I think will both provide some education for people and will provide some important contacts for their work in the future.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here. If you are interested in participating in the Reclaiming Conference 2025, I highly encourage you to check out our website, weunify.ca, where you can find all the details regarding ticket purchases as well as exact dates and times for our wonderful speakers like Glenn. If you're interested in hearing more, I highly encourage you to buy those tickets. Don't miss out. We would love to see as many of you there as are interested and able to attend. Thank you so much for your time today, Glenn. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks very much.